DeLorean's hidden factory files show something that nobody in the mainstream car world wants to sit with for too long, and honestly, the deeper you go into this, the more you realize the DMC-12 wasn't just a failed car company, it was a company that was never meant to survive in the first place. That's not a theory I'm throwing out casually. That's what the documents actually suggest when you read them without the Hollywood gloss that Back to the Future put over everything. So let me ask you something real quick, and I genuinely want you to drop this in the comments because I'm curious what side you land on. Do you think DeLorean was a genius who got destroyed by the system, or was he always playing a game he couldn't win? Because by the end of this, your answer might completely flip. Now, before we get into the files themselves, you have to understand who John DeLorean actually was before any of this happened, because that context is everything. This wasn't some outsider dreaming in a garage. This was the man inside General Motors who at one point was being groomed to run the entire company. He developed the GTO, he pushed the Pontiac division into its most profitable era, he wore turtlenecks to board meetings in the 1960s when everyone else was in suits and ties. He was the guy who made Detroit cool for about a decade, and then he walked away from it all to build something with his name on it. And that decision, that one choice, is where everything starts to unravel in ways that only became clear years later when the files came out. The factory was built in Dunmurry, Belfast, Northern Ireland, and if you know anything about what Belfast looked like in 1978 and 1979 when this was being planned, you already feel where this is going. This was the height of the Troubles. This was a city that had been economically gutted, politically fractured, and the British government under Margaret Thatcher's administration was desperate to show investment and jobs in the region. DeLorean didn't just bring a car factory, he brought the promise of around 2,000 jobs in a place that needed them badly, and that leverage, that political usefulness, is what got him access to approximately £77 million of British taxpayer money. And here's the part that the internal memos make uncomfortable, because some of the people inside that government process had early projections showing the company's financial model was shaky from the start, not impossible, but shaky in ways that should have slowed everything down. It didn't slow anything down. The money moved fast because the politics needed it to. If you're finding this interesting so far, just hit the like button real quick because this story gets significantly stranger from here and I want to make sure people actually see it. So the factory goes up, workers get hired, and this is a detail that gets glossed over constantly but it matters so much. The majority of the workforce in Dunmurry had never built a car before. These weren't poached engineers from Jaguar or Ford. These were people from a community that was being given an opportunity, and genuinely, the fact that they built anything at all is remarkable. But it meant the early production cars, the 1981 models, had real quality control problems. Panel gaps, electrical issues, fit and finish that wasn't matching the stainless steel dream DeLorean had been selling to investors. And the investors had been sold hard. The prospectus documents that surfaced later, the ones shown to potential buyers, painted projections that insiders apparently knew were aggressive to the point of being misleading. Not aspirational. Misleading. Now here's where Colin Chapman walks into this, and honestly Chapman's involvement alone could be its own entire video. Chapman was the founder of Lotus, a genuine engineering genius, one of the most respected figures in the motorsport world. DeLorean brought him in as a technical partner because the DMC-12's chassis and suspension development was being handled by Lotus engineers. But what the hidden financial documents revealed, and these came out through the British receiver's investigation after the company collapsed, was that somewhere around $17 million was allegedly funneled through a company called GPD Services in Geneva. The suggestion from investigators was that this money, which was supposed to be for engineering development, may have been diverted. Chapman died of a heart attack in December 1982, the same year everything fell apart, and he died before he could ever face questioning. DeLorean always maintained he didn't know where that money went. Whether you believe that or not, the timing of Chapman's death has always felt like one of those facts that just sits there quietly and doesn't let you forget it. And then comes October 1982. The company was already going into receivership, already collapsing under the weight of the cash shortfall and the production slowdown. And on October 19, 1982, John DeLorean was arrested in a Los Angeles hotel room in an FBI sting operation. The charge was cocaine trafficking. The footage was real, the handshake with the undercover agent was real, the briefcase full of cocaine was real. And within days it was everywhere. The story became about a disgraced car executive caught dealing drugs, and the company quietly died in the noise of that scandal. But here's what nobody talks about enough. DeLorean was acquitted. In 1984, a jury found him not guilty on all counts because his defense successfully argued government entrapment. The FBI had used a paid informant who had essentially drawn DeLorean into the deal at his most financially desperate moment, when he was trying to save the company, when he was willing to consider things he never would have considered otherwise. The judge himself had harsh words about the government's conduct in the case. DeLorean walked free legally. But the company was already gone and the narrative was already set, and that's what stuck in the public memory. Not the acquittal. The arrest footage. Now if I'm being honest, and this is the part where you have to just sit with the facts and feel what they're telling you, the timing of that arrest is where the files become most interesting. Because what the documents show is that the car itself was genuinely improving by late 1982. The quality issues from the early production run were being addressed. A second generation of improvements was being worked on. Sales were slow, but the car had a real following, and the team in Belfast knew they were getting closer to what DeLorean had originally promised. The company wasn't thriving, but it wasn't necessarily dead either. It was at that exact moment, the moment of potential recovery, that the arrest happened and everything stopped. Was it a coincidence? Legally you can't say it wasn't. But if you're someone who reads documents and looks at timelines, the fact that a financially desperate man trying to save a factory built with British government money was approached by a government informant at the precise moment that same government was dealing with the embarrassment of its investment failing, that's a sequence of events worth examining without looking away. The factory files themselves, the ones that have been analyzed by automotive historians and journalists over the years, show something specific about the internal culture of the company. There was a disconnect between what the executives were telling the public and investors and what the internal memos were saying. Cost overruns were being tracked internally that weren't reflected in the public-facing documents. Production targets that were announced externally were known internally to be unreachable given the cash flow situation. This isn't reconstruction, these are the actual documents from the receiver's investigation, from the British government's own postmortem on what happened to £77 million of public money, and they paint a picture of a company that was being managed for perception rather than for survival. Here's the thing about the workers in Belfast that I keep coming back to and I think deserves more than the footnote it usually gets. Around 2,000 people worked in that factory. When the company collapsed, they lost those jobs overnight. They were given almost no warning. Many of them had spent months learning completely new skills, had built something with their hands that they were genuinely proud of, and then it was over, and nobody in the broader DeLorean story seemed to spend much time asking what happened to them. The documentary attention, the books, the retrospectives, they're all about John DeLorean. The workers in Dunmurry barely get a paragraph. And those are the people who actually built the cars. There are around 9,000 DMC-12s that were produced before the factory shut down. Because of the way the inventory was managed at collapse, a significant number of those cars had actually been built but not yet sold, sitting in lots, and they ended up being liquidated at deeply discounted prices, which actually helped the car develop the cult following it has today because suddenly regular people could afford one. That part was accidental. The DeLorean became iconic partly because the collapse made it accessible, which is one of the stranger ironies in the whole story. And then Back to the Future came out in 1985, 3 years after the company died, and cemented the DeLorean DMC-12 as one of the most recognizable cars in history. John DeLorean himself had a complicated relationship with that. On one hand, it kept his name alive. On the other hand, it reduced a serious, complicated, genuinely unresolved business and legal story into a time machine punchline. The hidden files don't give you a clean villain. That's what makes this hard to sit with. They suggest a situation where multiple parties, DeLorean himself, his executives, Chapman and the people around him, and certain figures in the British government, were all managing a situation they knew was more fragile than they were admitting publicly. Whether that rises to deliberate fraud or just catastrophically optimistic management is something courts and investigators debated for years without full resolution. DeLorean spent the rest of his life in litigation, losing his estate, losing almost everything, and died in 2005 having never fully rebuilt what he had before 1982. What the files actually show, when you read them without wanting a simple story, is that the DMC-12 was born in a situation so politically loaded, so financially pressured, and so dependent on things going perfectly right that the margin for any of it to work was razor thin from day one. Not zero, but razor thin. And the moment it started going wrong, the people with the most to lose from the public embarrassment of that failure had options that DeLorean didn't have. He was exposed. They weren't. Whether the company was deliberately set up to fail or just failed in a way that was then managed and buried quickly is the question the files raise without fully answering. And maybe that's the most honest thing you can say about it. Some things are designed to leave exactly enough doubt that you can never be completely sure, and this is one of them. The stainless steel doors, the gullwing design, the Belfast factory floor, the Geneva bank account, the hotel room in Los Angeles, the acquittal that nobody remembers. It's all in the files. You just have to be willing to read them without deciding what you think before you start.